Well, here's what I wanted to talk about. I wanted to get your guys' feedback, Scott especially, but Kim too, being around the media for so long, on this YouTube video. Let me know if you see this okay. Have you guys seen this yet? This one that came out of the Occupy Wall Street with Fox News and kind of making the rounds. Have you guys heard about this?
Yeah, I think Ward was talking about it with Mark Stein today,
Oh,
but I
okay.
did watch it when you sent it yesterday. Yes, I watched it.
Scott, have you seen this yet?
Yeah, I did watch it. And let me ask you a process question, John, because I just got this is my first Hangout, as you know.
Yes.
I just got a little thing at the top of my screen that said you're watching YouTube, and it gave me the chance to do the same. Now, I just watched it this morning, so I'm not going to bother. But if I did that, would it just split the screen? How would that work?
Yeah, it'll split it. If you click it, it'll just put the YouTube video on the top, and then you'll see the rest of us on the bottom.
Okay, interesting. I won't. My, that opportunity has passed apparently, but I just watched it anyway. It was,
Okay, so you guys are on it. What do you guys think of it? I mean, what's the central question I wanted to find out was kind of from your experience working in the media. You know, as somebody that has been in the field that's done interviews, would this change your approach at all as a reporter, as a producer, knowing that now they can report on the reporters, or not? Is it business as usual?
Kim, I'll let
Scott,
you.
I defer to you. You go first.
Oh, geez, we're being way too nice. Okay.
Well, I have a strong opinion. I'm not shy, but I think you have actually had this. It impacts what you do and what you've been doing more,
Sure.
than what I've.
Well, I'll tell you, I'll try not to ramble, so stop me if I do. You know, things like that still get my blood pressure up a little bit. There's nothing, in my view, terribly new about turning on the media. I'm not generally, I don't find myself one who defends Fox News in particular, but I have seen people for many years, typically from the other end of the spectrum, turn on reporters like that
Hmm.
and pontificate and give speeches as that guy in the hat did in the video. He just happened to be giving a prepackaged speech from the left end of the spectrum. I have heard plenty of conservative activists and politicians accuse the mainstream media of equally egregious bias in favor of liberal causes over the years. And honestly, my gut reaction to all of it is great. You memorized a wonderful speech. I'm happy for you. It's good that the live crew showed up to give you that platform. That's part of the process.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, I once had an interview that was, I think it was kind of probably at a live event, might have even been at the State Fair, and I made the fatal mistake as the interviewer of handing the microphone to the person being interviewed. No, Scott said no, and you only have to do that once to learn. You never surrender the mic, and this reporter in the Fox piece totally surrendered the mic. I don't care that he was still holding on to it, but he gave the interview over to this guy. I mean, I learned this in as a talk show host, and it actually it was more closely illustrated in my life this week with a website that I am trying to manage myself through GoDaddy. They called wanting to know if I was going to activate a new domain that I bought for something, and he was just a customer service guy, and he was trying to upsell me
Yeah.
on adding email services or something. But the reason I hadn't activated it yet was because I was still traumatized by my text problems with an earlier GoDaddy issue. So I started unloading my tech issues to this guy. He doesn't care. He's trying to upsell me on email.
Yeah.
Do you think a Fox reporter cares if this guy tries to vilify him and punk him on the street? Dude, if you have a problem, either get your own show. Remember, what was her name, Scott? She was on KSBC AM. She had a talk show in the evening. Trudy, what was her name? Shuri Ryder. Remember Shuri Ryder? That was her standard response when people
Yes.
would try to take the mic. She'd say, get your own show. You know, this guy was trying to talk to Fox management by taking over that interview and talking directly to the audience. First of all, that's not effective. Fox management couldn't care less that this, reporter let go of his interview. They're not impacted by what this guy did. And secondly, it's on the reporter to keep control of his interview. You always have the benefit of hindsight, but don't you wish he would have just said, thanks a lot, given him the shoulder and moved on to the next
Mhm.
interview?
Of course, if he had, I think he would have left himself open to criticism that he was, and I'll use this word only with attribution, censoring a political view that he didn't like. Now, I don't think reporters can engage in censorship. I think that term applies to the government. But I think if I can imagine what that reporter was thinking, he was trying to demonstrate that, you can say anything you want on Fox News. We don't cut people off just because they are a little on the left-leaning side. I do think, just as a matter of uh, helping viewers through it, it's a little more productive. If people can make sort of one or 2 points at a time rather than delivering an entire manifesto as that guy did. I don't really think he was trying to reach Fox management. I think he was trying to reach an audience that was hundreds of times bigger
Yeah.
than he would ever have on his soapbox.
Well, yeah, but his wasn't his beef. His beef was with the philosophy of Fox management.
Sure, sure.
His beef wasn't with the reporter.
Oh,
You know,
he saw the reporter as an embodiment of Fox management, but I don't think he really expected, you know, uh, Roger Ailes to be sitting back in his office going, "Holy cow, you're right. I've been so wrong all these years." He's just trying to get to those viewers, and you could debate whether Fox viewers in general are going to be swayed by that speech. But I think
and does the reporter owe him that? I see what you're saying, Scott. You don't want to, when you wrestle in the mud, everybody gets dirty. I see what you're saying, but I don't think the reporter owed him that. I cringed when that reporter gave deference and said, "Well, of course, it was about 3 or 4 responses in," and then he just rolled over for the guy. And I thought, you know what? This is embarrassing.
yeah.
You don't owe this to this guy. He did not. I mean, you gotta. It's a conflict management question, I guess, isn't it?
Yeah, where was the bulldog reporter, right? I mean, to kind of go back at him. But I think the bigger question I'm curious about from a social media point of view is, you guys have a great history in the mainstream media, kind of like me, grew up in that field. Do you think, with the play that this got, as far as this viral video got, the hundreds of thousands of views and the reports and things like that, do you think that it ultimately will sway people's opinion of Fox or how they view that channel? I mean, does it bring a new element, a new dynamic to news reporting that we hadn't seen prior to, say, the last couple of years with social media?
I hate to sound cynical, but I think the only new dynamic is that it's quite possible more people will see it now on YouTube than ever, than saw it air live on Fox.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, this sounds cynical, but I think, the people who seek it out on YouTube for its political content will think it's right on, and the
Mm-hmm.
people who were watching it live on Fox, if we can generalize and say they're typical Fox viewers, will go, another left-wing weirdo trying to hijack the only fair and balanced network.
Yeah.
So people are going to be, of two distinct minds on this, I think.
What?
I grew up in a family where political contentions were always very strong and very strongly voiced. And I remember speaking to my mom before she died a few years ago, and I asked her if she'd seen a story on a network that will remain nameless, and she said, "Oh, I don't watch that network." And I said, "Why not?" She said, "I don't agree with that network."
Ah!
And isn't that how we're all choosing our news?
Yeah.
We watch the news we agree with. I mean, I think news consumers now are sophisticated and savvy enough to understand that nobody is presenting news without some bias. It's not possible to do. So I'm going to go with I'm going to go with the perspective and the point of view that most closely matches up with mine. And I think, I don't know if we end up with better consumed informers, completely uninformed consumers, completely uninformed consumers as a result. I don't know. I know there are certain news programs my husband will not stay in the same room with me because I watch knowing I'm going to disagree, but then I just sit, holler at the screen. So I'm seldom persuaded, even though I do try to watch their reporting. So yeah, I don't know where that leaves us, except to say that I think it's like the news is finding us instead of news outlets going to find the news now. Sort of like, I don't think that this changes the game, John. I think it reflects a change that already happened in the game a few years ago while none of us were watching.
So,
Yeah,
go ahead, Scott.
I find that a little bit depressing, and I certainly mean no disrespect to your mom, but I do think a lot of people feel that way these days, and they even define fair and balanced as meaning, these people agree with me.
Hmm.
I
Right.
worry that it's possible to consume a tremendous amount of content, information, whether you call it news or not, and never encounter an opposing opinion, at least one that's presented in an impartial, even-handed way. And that does worry me because I think, if you're intellectually curious, you want to hear what other people have to say, especially if it differs with your own position.
I want to
Right.
come.
I agree.
I want to come back to a question. This is something that's fascinating to me, and I find it kind of funny or almost hypocritical when I hear a reporter say, "Well, I'm unbiased. I don't have a bias here," and I just find that as a former reporter, I always had an inherent bias. I mean, even if I didn't want to, I did, right? I mean, is there such a thing as a completely unbiased journalist? Does that exist?
Well,
The idea, go ahead, Scott.
Standards you can
oh,
shoot.
Gary's with us. Gary, can you hear us?
Yes, now I can.
Oh,
Oh,
good.
good, Gary. Have you been able to hear the content so far?
Yes, I have.
What's your take on this? Is there such a thing as an unbiased journalist in your mind?
Not really, but I think there are things you can shoot for. There are standards you can shoot for that produce higher quality work. But I think we all bring our sets of biases to the media. But I'm going to largely agree with what Scott was saying that people these days tend to seek out news that confirms what they already think. But I do think that there are still some people in the middle that are persuadable and that news still matters in terms of pushing political dialogue one direction or the other. The vast bulk of people are entrenched in one side or the other, and the elections still swing back and forth based on those people in the middle that actually do seek out reliable information and make decisions based on it. So I still think there is something for a service that journalists perform, which is trying to sort through all of the BS and present coherent information to the public.
I needed to hear that, Gary. Thank you for that reminder. You and I have had this conversation many times over the years, and I agree with you, and I occasionally need a reminder of that. Yeah, there are people entrenched at both poles, but there are still some people in the middle, I think, who actually reach decisions through information. I've always thought it was a little bit of a false premise to suggest that reporters, journalists of any kind, are inherently objective or can be objective. But whether having opinions, by definition, makes you biased, I'm not sure. I think everybody has opinions. I think everybody's entitled to them. I think it's how you manage them and how you perform in a fair, impartial, even-handed way, despite your own beliefs. I don't think that means that journalists aren't entitled to vote or reach opinions on matters of public policy.
I will say too, just from my own experience as a PR guy last summer with the nurses' strike, what I found really interesting. Obviously, we were the nurses' union, so it was totally pro-union, workers' rights. None of the TV reporters, none of the print reporters ever, sided with us or were biased toward worker rights or anything, to the point where I didn't even realize half these folks are in unions, and talking to them, kind of behind the scenes after the fact, like a lot of them were very pro union, pro worker, but they were able to kind of put those opinions and beliefs aside and do fair reporting. So I mean, almost in my opinion, too far. I would have liked a little more pro worker, rah rah. But Scott, I think what you're saying is valid. I hadn't thought of it that way. That you're going to have opinions, you're going to have beliefs, but as a professional, you're going to put those aside when it comes to a story, right?
I hope so. I
Yeah,
hope so.
yeah.
But
Well, and I think it all depends, what the type of news story is too. I think some news stories lend themselves to more, um, I don't know, rhetorical exercise, if you will. You're right, Gary. What we're supposed to be doing is informing people so they can draw their conclusions. We're supposed to be giving a full picture of the facts. We're supposed to help, fair and balanced should mean if I hear from John Nemo, and I know Scott living disagrees, I quote them both. I mean, that's so basic.
Hmm.
And it is missing in a lot of reporting still. Um, so I think that is still really important. There's a story that I'm following right now that I've had a lot of trouble finding the facts on one particular side of it, and I'm longing for a journalist to look into this story. You know, people who are opposing uh, the funding of Susan G. Komen because they say that they have ties to Planned Parenthood and that they support abortion rights and that they're doing more than simply looking for a cure for breast cancer. Well, that's a pretty serious charge.
Yeah.
Can that that's something that I mean, right? If you make a charge, you have to offer the evidence. You have to prove that. You know, so I'd like to see a story on that where somebody lays out the facts and tell me how they came to that conclusion, what they have to support it.
I'm
It's hard to
surprised
find.
been hard to find that coverage. I do think that's an interesting story, and it poses a potentially really interesting challenge for news organizations, and by that, in this case, I mean television stations that have relationships with that organization. If you have a race for the cure, as
Right,
CARE does in this market,
right.
how free are you, or how able are you to report, and here's where I'll, kind of paraphrase Gary, to report objectively, no matter what your own experiences or opinions might be, on an organization with which your television station has a very lucrative partnership. I don't think a lot of people understand the money that's involved in the profit to television stations
And
from
the
worthy
sympathy,
causes.
the sympathy of, well, this organization's helping women, why in the world would you investigate and stir up it, so yeah, I mean, aside from, follow the money trail on whatever partnerships might exist between the reporting entity and, the subject of the story,
Mm-hmm.
how do we also make sure that the people, the stakeholders, the people that it really matters to, the women with cancer,
Mm-hmm.
how are we going to respect them, give them the dignity of needing the facts? I mean, these are the people who actually need this information, but also, you know, not become part of the story just by even asking the question or investigating.
Okay.
Right. Well, go ahead.
I'm dying to know what you guys think of this because this is something that gets thrown around all the time with me in my profession, talking to different people. I never experienced this as a journalist, but I want to know what your guys' opinions are, having been in newsrooms. And Gary, feel free to chime in too from your experience. Does advertising and who's advertising and who's paying the bills at your station, does that at all impact your news coverage? Have you ever seen that, or do you ever feel that
Yes.
is a real issue?
Yeah, and I think that Scott just touched on something that probably the biggest hole in the firewall is this whole community approach, uh, where you have these large institutions come in, and yeah, the cause may be worthy, but now they're in the door both in a marketing sense and in using your personalities to promote their event and a revenue sense. And there may even be an agreement to do X number of stories over the course of building up to the event itself and
Hmm.
go along with event coverage. So there are direct agreements that are binding the news organization to do something. And yeah, the cause may be worthy, but it makes a shamble of a firewall between marketing, public relations, and news. It all works together now. In particular, in the healthcare area, the healthcare providers have been very astute at figuring out how to get around that firewall by embracing, a worthwhile community project, but then actually gaining entry into the newsroom in the process. They might not have editorial control in terms of editing the copy of the stories, but the kind of stories you're going to do are going to be all favorable. It's the nature of the beast.
Gary,
So,
I think you've identified something that's a common misconception. People ask me sometimes if I've ever had a story spiked or killed, and the answer is once in my entire career. And I won't say where, but I'll tell you it was not at KSTP, where Gary and I worked together. But it has been much more common for me to feel pressured in the way that Gary describes, not to kill stories, but to do stories because, we're now the whatever station, the Race for the Cure station,
Benevolent.
Yeah.
and we've got a lot of good stuff going, and it's, there's the sense that, hey, this is our project, surely the news department is going to support that, even, by the way, even at the expense of other worthy causes. That's a much more common conflict of interest in my experience.
Okay. But not the direct pressure from on high of, a case of, let's say, a healthcare provider, sponsoring a newspaper's app, right? Or new project or advertising on their front page. You're not seeing, you don't believe the case would be where somebody comes into the newsroom and says, you know what, you need to stop investigating their alleged improprieties. They're paying the bills here. I mean, it's never that blatant
No,
or
I
obvious.
think that happens. I think
Really?
there attempts like that occur. As I say, I can only think of one instance where I actually had a story spiked, and it didn't happen to do in that instance with a station advertiser.
Okay.
But I do think that happens elsewhere. More often, I think it's sort of understood. I've talked to, I would say, dozens of news directors, in seminars that I've led, who've said, "Look, I would never take on that story in the first place because I know I couldn't get away with it if it were a leading car dealer or a big industry.
Wow.
We wouldn't even attempt it."
Kim, what's your
I,
take?
In
you
particular,
know,
to know if it's a car dealer, the kind of scrutiny you're going to have to go through to get it on the air. So there may be a certain amount of self-censorship going on. I recall a conversation with one of our sales manager after Kevin Berger broke just a great story on bad lease deals at one of the major, in fact, guy that's now in prison, Denny Hecker, was engaged in. She went undercover and showed how they would tell the people at the time of the lease one thing, and then when they actually got the contract, it was different, amounting to thousands of dollars of additional money in Hecker's pocket. And our sales manager said to me, "Boy, I'm so glad to know about that story because Hecker turned around and dropped $200,000 worth of business from CCO and spread it around the other stations in town."
Wow.
So, and I just got curious and said, "I wish I had that story because that was a damn good story and it served our public." So, go
I
ahead.
agree. I agree, Gary. I think that, if you, I mean, radio is bread and butter at car dealerships, so that's just a perfect example. Who's going to actually go after that story? Is it going to be career suicide? It does take some courage. It does take some, an independent spirit. Maybe you, Scott and Gary, maybe you can help me with this. I remember when we took the kids on a tour of Boston, they showed the tabloids and the pamphlets and the leaflets that the Patriots had been crafting as journalism, as the fourth estate, trying to bring down the British regime, trying to, gain independence. And these people were financing this communication, this mass communication at the time, out of their own money for their own cause. You know what I mean? They were sort of sponsoring. I mean, that was the first citizen journalism, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Speaking out against the crown. The editorial cartoons. If you've seen them, if you go to these to those exhibits around Faneuil Hall in Boston, talk about demonizing your enemy. Literally, they would, their drawings of the king as Satan and so on. And it struck me that that really helped me understand the fact that media bias is just another way of saying, why are you writing? What is the point of view? What is it that you're trying to communicate? So if someone is sponsoring you to bring your tabloid into being and your point of view, it's going to be very difficult to turn around, and investigate, well, what are target's hiring practices? If they're paying me to endorse them to spend more and save more, spend less, whatever they're. I know this because I
You just killed your chances of an endorsement, Kim. You're done.
I know. You know what I mean?
Well,
But
I think
organizations are very shrewd to bring powerful voices online. You're never going to hear Bill Cosby want to know what's actually in Jello pudding, right?
You're right. Yeah.
I mean,
Well, there were, some of the power barons of 100 years ago, and Scott's probably even more knowledgeable than me on on this. I went into newspapers because they wanted that platform to change the political process, or in the case of Randolph Hearst, start a war or whatever else. So it was partly as a backlash to those kinds of reporting that there was the attempts made to elevate the professional standards and bring, ethics into reporting and separate the economics and the politics from the day-to-day reporting that created kind of media that we had until recently. Now there's a new dynamic again.
Yeah,
And
I agree, Gary.
laptop and publish, so it's a different world.
Yeah, I don't think advocacy journalism is anything new. Although, and I don't even think commercially corrupt journalism, to use a harsh term,
Hangout, sorry.
is all that new.
What do you need?
I will say, to your earlier point, Gary, that happened to involve Denny Hecker and car dealers in general, I think that kind of thing happens far more often than people realize. And I think, whether a news director or a news manager at whatever level is willing to take that risk is a function in part of that, not only that person's principles, but what the station's economics are at the moment. And which station it is, by the way. For all the bad things that have been said about the Hubbards over the years, they are exceptionally principled people, and if you piss them off, they're willing to lose a lot of money to defend what they consider to be their values. Whereas, a publicly held company might not take a chance like that. I mean, it isn't just car dealers, as you know, Gary. It could be landscape or hardware stores or whatever. I can think of a handful of cases just from memory where advertisers did exactly what you said. They didn't complain. They simply canceled their advertising and spent that money on a competitor, and that spoke volumes about how they.
Well, and I think, John, the book Unpaid Professionals by Andrew Zimbalist that came out, I think, in the 90s, tells the story of how broadcasting is the reason that college sports is corrupt, to whatever degree that it is corrupt, because there's so much money to be made off those broadcasts. Well, you're going to read about that from Andrew Zimbalist. You're probably not going to see that story on CBS 60 Minutes.
Yeah.
Because they got the Final Four. They're not going to tell that story. Why would they?
Well, actually,
And they may not even.
that might be one of the few exceptions of a broadcast that's powerful enough to go against its obvious own interest. But I get your point, and it's a good one.
But think about what was the Jeffrey Wigan story, right? The Insider.
Yep.
I mean,
The tobacco story, sure.
there's a price when you decide to side with the sponsor over the network.
Absolutely. And you know what? Here, you might not expect this from me, but there is a plausible defense on the part of the advertiser, not necessarily the news organization, but if I am an advertiser who feels that your uh, reporting on me was unfair and inaccurate and lopsided and irresponsible, I have every right, I think, not to support that. That's not the kind of product I want to spend my advertising money on. So I'm not trying to censor you, but you know what? I'm going to spend my money on a product that I think is more reputable than yours. And you can read into that what you choose. And that's the way it happens.
Outstanding. You guys, I don't want to keep you any longer. We already blew through half an hour, but this for a first Google chat, Google Hangout was fantastic. I personally learned a lot. I mean, I think I love to talk about this stuff and to talk about the ethics and get the breadth and the depth of experience here was really neat. So we're going to do this every Tuesday. So hopefully you guys can do it again next week. No pressure.
This is my first hangout. I appreciate it.
All right, I'm going to sign off, you guys. Great job. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Gary. See you, Scott.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Gary.